Well, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, whatever your current life situation is. Hello, YouTube. It's Jeffrey Kite back again with another episode of Kites Curiosities. Got my trusty sidekick, Olivia, with me here this beautiful July morning here in South Georgia. Going to take y'all on another little field trip. Today we are in Andersonville, Georgia, site of the National Prisoner of War Museum and home of the infamous Andersonville Prisoner of War Camp, where thousands of Union soldiers were held prisoner of war during the Civil War from February of 1864 until about May of 1865. We're going to do a little driving tour. We're going to drive around, find some areas of interest to show you guys, talk about the atrocities that occurred here, Americans on Americans, and the brutal conditions that was here endured by the prisoners, and also prisoners of war throughout history. We won't just focus on the Civil War. We'll try to examine prisoners of war who endured some serious hardship for our nation throughout history and other wars. Olivia, you ready to go take a look? All right, let's go. So right now, this is stop number one. This is the Wisconsin monument dedicated to the Wisconsin soldiers who were imprisoned here. If you look all around, you'll see these white stakes in the ground. These white stakes symbolize the barriers that were around. This white stake there, another white stake right there, white stake there. And what I've learned was there wasn't just one wall or one barrier. There was actually several walls. So they would have one wall to close all the camp off. And that wall was, and I'll show you in a minute, they put stakes, these tall, like telephone pole type stakes that ran 5 feet into the ground. And so they put that wall up, and then they came and they put another one up, and then they put another wall up. And so they were constantly trying to reinforce the defenses of either outside attack or escape. And so that's why you see so many different stakes and markers and things. It's just incredible. And this, just overlooking all of this, pan it back out, all of this is where 13,000 people lived and died. I think in all told, 37,000 people were kept in this massive field, this area here. I've heard numbers of 14,000 people died. So between 13 and 14,000 people died out here. So like I said, they had several different walls of defense, but the first wall, if you will, was not an actual wall. It was just what was known as the deadline. The deadline was the furthest point you could go before you got to the first outer wall of the actual outer wall of the prison. So you were allowed to roam free around wherever it was you needed to go, but you could not cross the deadline. You could not cross into that area right there. For if you did cross into the deadline, you were shot by a soldier who was up in one of the little checkpoints up at the top. A lot of people have told stories and documented where people in this camp committed suicide, basically they just couldn't take it anymore. They crossed the deadline just to end their suffering. All throughout the park, as I stated earlier, the states who had men be imprisoned here and lose their lives here, they erected monuments to honor them. This is Rhode Island's monument, and we'll take a look at all of them. And this is the monument in memory of the Michigan soldiers who were imprisoned and died on these grounds. This is the Massachusetts Memorial here in Andersonville. I believe I read 767 known men from armies of Massachusetts passed away here. The biggest of the monuments that I've seen so far is the Ohio Monument. And this is the monument to honor the 1,055 soldiers from Ohio who died here at Andersonville. I found this to be very interesting. This is a monument dedicated to the 1,284 Confederate prisoners from the state of Tennessee who died during the Civil War. As best I could tell, the prisoner of war camp for Confederate soldiers was in the city of Chicago. I do know there was one in Chicago. I don't know if there was any others. There probably were, as the prison here, Andersonville, was basically set up because of the overflow that was hampering the city of Richmond, cutting into their food supplies, cutting into the city of Richmond's resources. They decided to open up another prison down here in southwest Georgia, and that's what became known as Camp Sumter, which is what Andersonville was known at the time. So it's very poignant that Tennessee honors their prisoners of war here. So this is part of the actual trail that these soldiers would walk. They would get off the train station back behind me. You can't really see it. It's all woods, grown up now, and so, but they'd come off the train station and march and hike through all that area. Come right along this trail. They would cross this stream that was their only source of fresh water. More on that in a minute. Flows from right around over there all the way down through here. I think it branches off over here. The only source of fresh water. And into the north gate. Now, they reconstructed the north gate. None of the things are still here. So let me just give you but this is a reconstruction, but let me give you a glimpse as to what they entered. They would come up this hill. Again, marching, coming up this hill. I think this is part of the creek again. That was their only source of fresh water, was that little creek for thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And they'd come up through here. And this is what they saw. Soldiers would be perched up in here, ready to shoot any escapees. And of course it didn't just end there, it went on for miles and miles. Just use your imagination. And they would enter gates similar to this. And folks, these are not I mean, these are not light gates to push and pull on. I mean, look at all that wood, all that steel, all that cast iron. These are heavy. They would enter the doors, and this was it. This was all they saw. For miles and miles and miles. You can't even see out. I mean, you have a little crack right here, but the stories that the soldiers wrote about and shared was that you could not see out at all the outside world. They were completely cut off from everything and everybody. And of course, using your imagination, don't cross the deadline, or else you had somebody waiting on you right up there at the top to end your life, if you so chose to cross the deadline. I can't imagine the psychological torture that these men endured. And those doors were closed. They didn't leave them open. Again, you have to use your imagination a little bit. In August of 1864, the summer heat was just absolutely wreaking havoc on the soldiers here at Andersonville. And many prayers were sent up to God, to the Lord, to please provide some relief to the harsh conditions and no access to fresh water, as the creek that I showed you earlier had become polluted. The prison was designed where fresh water was going to be at the top, where people could get a sip of water and drink. The middle part of the creek was where prisoners could bathe, take a bath, things like that. And then the bottom of the creek was where they would use the bathroom as for their latrine. Well, because the stockades were 5 feet deep down into the ground, it created a backwash into the creek. Circulation could not happen, and the creek soon became completely contaminated and with diseased and just icky water. And on August the 14th of 1864, the prisoners' prayers were answered. The soldiers' prayers were answered. That's what I was trying to say. There are recorded accounts that a lightning bolt struck near where I'm standing right now and popped up this gush of crystal clear spring water that was a relief to so many soldiers. But unfortunately, it was behind the deadline. Soldiers started retrieving this water with cups tied to fence posts, tent poles. They would dip their cup down into this water because they didn't want to die. They finally got what they were looking for. They finally got the relief they needed. And so they would take these cups and they dip it down in the spring water. And finally the guards took pity on them. The guards had, excuse me, back that camera up. The guards, finally felt a sense of compassion. The Confederate guards said, okay, you can cross the guard line and go get you some water. That water sustained a lot of people for their inevitable rescue that was going to occur in April and May of 1865. And they named this site, I'm about to show you. There's the pavilion about where this spring water sprung up. They named it Providence Point. Providence Spring, excuse me. They built a pavilion here and dedicated it to the soldiers of Andersonville and the ones that came back years later and shared their stories. They dedicated this pavilion here and built it and dedicated it on Memorial Day of 1901. 52,000 plus soldiers who were confined here, and the nearly 14,000 who died. Here's a better shot of the creeks. Again, started right back up there where that tree line is and flowed down. It's a great idea, but this hardcore execution. Nothing to drink but just nastiness. This is a view from the Star Fort, or the commanding officer's headquarters, or the site of it. It's just a barren field now, but he and his leaders and commanders and such would have this view of the prison camp. And keep in mind, it was still fortified and all that wooden stockade all the way around it. Now here is the man that was in charge of Andersonville prison, or Camp Sumter as it was officially called. Captain Henry Wirtz. It was a controversial decision. He obviously was arrested in 1865 after the Civil War had ended, and they were starting the process of, finding out, who did what, when, where, why, how, and all of that. And Captain Wirtz was one of them. And he went to Washington, D.C., and he faced a war crimes trial. And his defense was he was just following orders. And his defense was also that he was not provided adequate supplies and materials to take care of them prisoners down there in Andersonville. And it is documented that he reached out to the Confederate government and requested more relief, more supplies, more things, talked about the conditions down there, and the Confederate government denied him. So, was it his fault that the prison was in such bad shape? Was it not? That's a debate for you to decide. Keep watching this video. Use your own knowledge and history and background information that you're able to get about reading about this guy, and make your own decision. In the end, he was executed for war crimes, even though there was some people on his behalf that testified. There was 158 witnesses at his trial. And of those 158 witnesses, 145 testified that the reason why the conditions were so sad and just decrepit was beyond his scope of responsibility. It was just, he just didn't have what he needed. Now, it's documented now. People went and testified to that, both Union and Confederate. So it was both sides. I haven't found any 100% verification of this yet, but I believe some prisoners of war on the Union side even testified that, hey, he was handcuffed. He kept trying to get us stuff, but nothing ever came. But here and there, he was hanged in Washington, D.C., and remains a controversial figure. Some say he's a villain, some say he was a martyr. You decide. As stated earlier, cannons were strategically placed around Andersonville to fortify the position, to any outward attacks they could fire on them, or any inward insurrections or escapes they could fire upon the prisoners. Okay, so I have a correction to make. I had the flow of the creek backwards. What you just saw up where Providence Spring and all of that was where the fresh water was, and it flowed back towards the tree line that I was pointing to this area that we're at now, known as the sinks. And I'm about to show you the sinks. It's about a 4-acre area inside the stockade walls that was pretty much inhabitable. It's just a big swamp, but still people were forced to have to kind of live around here. There's venomous snakes in this area. Just, you know, and again, the backflow, the problems, that all that is still true. The water from this area backed up into the freshwater area part that I showed you a few minutes ago, and just made this place just hell on earth to a lot of people. Again, the deadline stake right there. Another deadline stake right there. There's stories of men who were so desperate for water coming down to this area that was dysentery. So desperate for water, coming down here and sinking into the mud up to their chest, right along here, right where that deadline is. Sinking into the mud up to their chest just to get a drop, a taste, a cup of this contaminated water right here. Just the desperation, I can't imagine. So what did the prisoners, what did they live in? Well, they weren't given a lot of supplies. They weren't given much of anything, really. They just kind of had to make do with what they had. And so for shelter, they created these crude little tents known as shebangs. And when I say they're crude, they are very crude. Let's take a look at some of them. Imagine this being your only relief from rain, heat. It's not much of a tent. They would use blankets. They would use whatever pieces of cloth they could find. They would even take dead soldiers' uniforms and, you know, stitch them, tie them together, and make these tents, or shebangs as they call them. And that's what they would sleep under. That's what they would get up under to resist the heat. Maybe if you were lucky enough to be captured with your tent, your field tent, you could keep that. So besides building the stockades around the prison, they also designed these earthwork defenses, or these ditches that they've constructed that also went around the prison, and they could mount cannons. There we go. Mount cannons to the top of and defend the position of Camp Sumter that way. Well, I did not intend for there to be a part one or a part two. I wanted to get it all together and show you all the Andersonville National Historic Site and the Prisoner of War Museum all in one video, but it is long, and I like to break it up, give people a chance to watch some different things and that kind of stuff. So this is the conclusion of the Andersonville National Historic Site, Camp Sumter, as some people refer to it still to this day, portion of the video. In the next video, I will show you the National Prisoner of War Museum, which is the only museum in the United States that gives honor and respect and pays tribute to our nation's prisoners of war. So tell me what y'all think about Andersonville. What did y'all think about that place? Sad. Just, you know, it's mixed emotions. Wonderful that it was liberated. Sad for all the things that they went through. And I think it's a piece of history we need to continue to share with our young people, because, as the old saying goes, if you do not remember your history, you're going to repeat it. And I would hate to see something like that happen again in our nation. So, as always, folks, like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you want to do. Till next time, y'all take care. Now, have a good one.